Hey family, Reverend Dorsey here from Christ Our Redeemer. And if you didn't know, we just recently launched our relationship series entitled The Conversation, Dealing with Intimacy. I'm recording from my home as I promised I would give you a recap for those of you who missed it. And some of you may have the question, what is intimacy? We decided in our first session not to answer this question because the definition of intimacy is awful dynamic in that there are various definitions of intimacy. You may have one, I may have one, our friends may have another. And so we don't want to box intimacy in. We want to discover what the definition of intimacy is, and we want to pursue a definition that will work for us as we pursue a method of dealing with our own intimacy in ways that will be glorifying to God. We established actually three things right off the top. One of them is that if we're going to be a young adult in the 21st century seeking God, or someone seeking after a moral standard of living in their intimate spaces, we have to understand that intimacy is something that we have to deal with. Approach it, face it, and in that way we find solutions before we get into circumstances that are compromising or challenging or cause for question or cause for pause. We also established at the beginning that intimacy in itself is not bad. And so that people who come to the conversation or engage the task of dealing with intimacy with a negative connotation and come with all of the hurt and the pain and the disruption that came along with past experiences, we've got to deal with the fact that intimacy in itself is not bad. In fact, it's good. It's only when people mismanage intimacy or find themselves surprised by the intimate situations or find themselves surprised by how their body or their mind or their spirit responds when they are propositioned with opportunities to be intimate. So we just have to learn how to manage it. If we really, really dig deep into intimacy, we will then begin to see that intimacy in itself is not bad, and we got to discuss that last night. We also said that the ability to manage intimacy is not related to age, but is related to experience. We looked at the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife, and we know that this story really tells us that Joseph, after being sold out by his family, finds himself in the home of an Egyptian master that's really close to the Pharaoh. And because God was with Joseph, Joseph finds himself with a great wealth of responsibility. And in the midst of trying to manage that responsibility, Joseph is propositioned by his Egyptian master's wife. Dealing with intimacy is about dealing with the choices that we make. The choice of who to pursue intimacy with. The choice of who to be alone with. The choice about when to say yes and the choice about when to say no. All of this is encompassed within this task of dealing with intimacy. Really talking to those people who have some difficulty with these kinds of questions. Remember, intimacy is about dealing with the choices that we make. Joseph had a choice. He could have said yes to Potiphar's wife. Potiphar's wife had a choice. She could have never propositioned Joseph. But we know that they made their choices. And so this story offers us a positive example of a man who said no to a woman who had propositioned him. He said no to a married woman. He said no to fooling around on the job. He said no to messing up a situation that God had blessed him in. And he chose to preserve the integrity of the position that God had blessed him with. So one of the things that we really take from that is that dealing with intimacy offers us the opportunity to choose our own personal pleasures or choose saying yes or preserving the opportunity that God has given us. We can also see that commitments don't necessarily get rid of the dilemmas that we face in our intimate space. Who knows why Potiphar's wife was pursuing Joseph? All we know is that a married woman was trying to get with another man. And so we have some things that we have to deal with if we're going to deal with our intimacy. And so we got a good opportunity to discuss why we make the choices that we make. We know that when we're looking for a prospective mate, we look at several things. And we got the opportunity to sit in a room and discuss some of those things. We talked about how they look, because we know that the text said that Potiphar's wife noticed that Joseph was well built and handsome. And as some of us do when we want to pursue intimacy with someone, we look at their external experience and we look at their external makeup. They've got to be cute. They've got to have these type of teeth. They got to have these kinds of eyes. They've got to have their makeup this way. They got to have their hair this way. The body has to be shaped this way. Again, dealing with intimacy is about dealing with the choices that we make. And ultimately, how we make these choices speaks to some of the challenges that we have in our intimate space. So we got to wrestle with that last night. And if you were in the room, you would have had an interesting time hearing some of the feedback that we got. We also got to discuss, why did Joseph say no? If we look closely at the story, Potiphar's wife was rejected by Joseph. And how does rejection play into how we deal with intimacy? How does rejection play into our concept of intimacy? Is intimacy a negative thing because people have rejected us and because they have pushed us to the side and because we made ourselves vulnerable, we made ourselves available, and they said no to us? And so how does that influence how we engage the conversation about intimacy? Are all of our endeavors with our partners and our prospective mates, are they now tarnished because somebody rejected us? These are good questions, and each of us have had to face them at one point or another. So if you find any of this conversation appealing to you and you're a young adult and you want to have a conversation about intimacy, we encourage you to join us next week. Next Wednesday, July 18th at 7 p.m., we're going to be doing it again. Except this time, we're going to deal with David and Bathsheba. And we will see what happens when a person makes a different choice when they're dealing with their intimate space. Makes a different choice when they're lonely and has some kind of urge to do something they shouldn't be doing. And so we've got a lot to talk about. If this is interesting to you, we'll see you next week. God bless you. Thank you for tuning in.